This is John Bodden, historian at Oregon State University. In this lecture, I'm going to provide a brief overview of major developments in the history of beer and brewing after the collapse of the Roman Empire and through the Middle Ages. As we will see, one major development from this time period was the gradual but persistent adoption of hops in European brewing. Cervesia is the Latin word for beer, and the Romans, like their Greek cousins, disdained the beer of Egypt and Mesopotamia. They preferred wine. But the Roman Empire was massive, and as it expanded into North Africa and Northern Europe, Roman armies became more acquainted with the beer drinkers of these regions, where the climate in some cases precluded viticulture, and the natives preferred ale made from cereal grains. To drink, wrote Roman historian Tacitus, the Teutons, or Germans, have a horrible brew fermented from barley or wheat, a brew which has only a far removed similarity to wine. But we know beer was an important commodity in the late imperial Roman Empire because it warranted mention in Diocletian's price edict of 301 AD. And beer from Britain, for instance, was fixed at the price of 4 denarii per pint, which was twice the price of beer from Egypt. Jumping ahead to 476, a barbarian warrior named Odoacer captured the city of Rome and ruled Italy, while other Germanic tribes, the Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, and Saxons, carved up their own kingdoms out of what had been the Western Roman Empire. In other words, beer-drinking barbarians replaced wine-drinking elites. Another 4 centuries later, Western Europe found itself in turmoil. Non-Christian raiders, explorers, and conquerors, such as the Vikings, attacked settlements on the coasts and rivers, and in 845 they laid siege to Paris. No strong centralized government existed to guard frontiers and police the sea lanes, as had been the case during the Pax Romana or Roman peace. As a result, people left the cities in favor of rural areas and pledged service to lords in return for a promise of protection. Nobles built fortified castles in the countryside as safe havens, and feudal society, you could say, developed out of this chronic lack of security in Western Europe. Medieval peasants in the 10th century were not sophisticated brewers, for instance. They often put malt and water in barrels, mixed it up, pitched in herbs and flavoring agents from the forest, and waited for fermentation to naturally occur. No boiling, no fermentation in separate vessels. This was brewing at its simplest. So how and when did things become more sophisticated? To a significant degree, the monastic orders of Europe advanced the art and science of brewing before the reemergence of towns and cities, because they had more resources for experimentation and higher levels of education. Saint Benedict called on monks to live within their own communities and through their own labor be self-sufficient. The rule also required monks to offer their hospitality to travelers, which meant beer production in some regions and wine production in others. The plan of St. Gall, a drawing made around 830 CE, offered one model for monastic life. The plan lays out all of the essential features for a monastery, including 3 breweries. Monks seem to prefer working in the bakeries and breweries because of the warmth they provided, and because they found the smell of baking bread and fermenting beer appealing. And some of these monks, we can probably assume, overindulged. Ever since beer was first made, brewers have struggled to find ingredients to balance the sweetness of the malt. In the early Middle Ages, it was Grut. Grut is a term for any herbal mixture used to flavor and preserve beer among European brewers during the Middle Ages. There remains some mystery as to what spices made up Grut. We know bog myrtle was commonly used, as well as wild rosemary and laurel leaves. Beer made with Grut would have had a distinctive and potent taste. And again, what beer tasted like 1,000 years ago is mysterious. It's a bit like imagining the flavors of beer from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Besides Groot, medieval brewers spiced their beers with all kinds of things, from cumin and ginger to mint and sage. To the modern palate, I'm sure it would taste exotic and possibly distasteful. But Groot beers were what people drank, and state authorities wanted a cut of the profits. Groottrek refers to state control over the supply of Groot, and the right to derive revenue from any brewer using it. Bishops and counts claimed this monopoly, as well as towns and cities. If you want to brew, you must buy marked up Groot from us, and the Groottrek could make hefty profits. So beer brewers had to pay a tax for their Groot, and as we will see, cities and towns will continue to impose taxes and restrictions on brewing even after the Groot beers are displaced by their hopped counterparts. Let's talk about technology. During the Middle Ages, monastic and commercial brewing was separated into two steps: mashing and boiling. The mash tun is a brewhouse vessel, usually made of wood, used for mixing the ground malt or mashing it with hot water. The porridge-like result is held for a certain amount of time and at a certain temperature until the porridge becomes sugar water or wort. From the mash tun, brewers would transfer their wort to a brew kettle for boiling. Now, early copper kettles, which are great conductors of heat, would have been small and equipped with hangers for suspension over a fire. But eventually the monasteries and commercial breweries began fabricating larger mash tuns and copper kettles. The increase in size and the separation of brewing tasks had various benefits: superior filtration, control over temperature, and cooling. In short, brewing was becoming far more refined and sophisticated in comparison to the old pottery brew vessels of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Let's talk about hops. Hops are the flowers or cones of a plant native to the northern hemisphere that impart bitterness, flavor, and prevent bacterial infections in beer. They are significant for extending the shelf life of beer and facilitating its movement over long distances without fear of spoilage. It's the alpha acids in the flower's resin glands that impart bitterness and do the job of preventing infections. If you've ever smelled different hop varieties, it can be striking how some smell so strongly of citrus, some have tropical fruity notes, and others are spicy. Think black pepper and cloves. Noble hop is a historical and commercial term assigned to 4 distinct European hop varieties: Hallertauer, Tettnanger, Spalt, and Saaz. 3 of the noble hops hail from southern Germany, and most new hop varieties can trace their genetic heritage to at least one of these noble flowers. European brewers probably experimented with hops as a bittering agent to balance the sweet flavor of the malt, only to discover the cone's preservative qualities. Hildegard of Bingen was a 12th century abbess of a Benedictine convent in Germany. She was a polymath and championed the medicinal properties of hops and urged their use in beer. Her scientific writings are thought to contain the first recorded references to the use of hops in beer as a preservative. One important feature of life in medieval Germany was the sheer number of towns and monasteries that brewed beer. And this concentration of brewers led to competition, experimentation, and innovation. They tried aging beer in wine casks, but increasingly, commercial brewers turned to hops as their preferred flavoring agent. The cities of Hamburg, Bremen, and Einbeck all brewed with hops by the 13th century, and each city developed a reputation for making high-quality beers in Northern Europe. Not only that, they exported their drinks. The Hanseatic League was a medieval trade union of German cities that began in the 12th century and then expanded into a much wider overseas commercial network across the Baltic and North Atlantic. As a result, participating German cities began exporting their goods as well as hopped beers to ports across the Hanseatic League. Hamburg beer became synonymous with beer made with hops by the mid-1300s. called the Brauhaus der Hanse, brewhouse of the Hanseatic League. According to Richard Unger, the city produced more than 25 million liters of beer annually in 1360, with over 450 breweries in operation and an output of about 300 liters for every person living in the town. This was a massive scale for the time. Dutch brewers had to endure stiff competition from beers imported from northern Germany, and especially the port city of Hamburg, but eventually Amsterdam began brewing hopped beers on a similarly massive scale for the time. Southern Germany did not export its beers like northern Germany, but it had very strong brewing traditions. Wihenstaffen Abbey and Weltenberg Abbey are the world's oldest still operating breweries, and both are located in Bavaria, a region in southern Germany. Another one of Germany's most successful breweries, Paulaner, is owned by an individual family in our time, but it originally was established in 1364 by the Paulaner Order of Mendicant Friars in Munich. Now, with the growth of towns and cities in the late medieval period, monasteries could not keep up with the demand for beer, and commercial brewing took on a new importance. Munich's Brewers Guild, for instance, was established in 1280, and in the centuries ahead, the importance of beer in southern Germany was underscored by various laws and ordinances which were designed to maintain high standards. For example, the Dukes of Bavaria began using state power to regulate the brewing process. The Reinheitsgebot, or beer purity law, was issued by Duke Wilhelm IV of Bavaria in 1516, and it stipulated, like a previous law, that no items could be used for making beer other than barley, hops, and water. The law also concerned itself with the price of beer and the law's enforcement. It has been called one of the first modern consumer protection laws. By declaring that only barley could be used in beer, Duke Wilhelm was also saving wheat for bread and trying to create stable prices for two important foodstuffs. It also helped ensure that Bavarian beer was safe and unadulterated. In Bavaria, the state wanted a reliable supply of beer, and that takes us to the Hofbrauhaus. That's the name for the court brewery in Munich. Completed in 1591, it is owned by the Bavarian government and produces many types of beer using original recipes handed down by the nobility, including Weissbier, Helles Dunkel, and Oktoberfest lagers. It's a symbol of the Bavarian state's role in the regulation and production of beer. For Americans, this would be a little bit like each state government operating a brew house in its capital city to maintain a quality supply of beer for the political class. Not a bad idea, if you ask me. In conclusion, we've seen that beer brewing got much more sophisticated during the Middle Ages. Mash tuns and copper brew kettles provided brewers with more control over filtration, heating, and cooling. Fewer people brewed at home, and greater numbers of people bought their beer from professional brew houses, where governments regulated and supervised the process to a degree heretofore unseen. Hops came into regular use across continental Europe, and that set up what's going to happen down the line. Hops will become a global industry with many different countries cultivating their own, from northern regions in the United States to Japan and northern China. The hops have gone global. Finally, I want to end by mentioning Trappist beer, the widely respected, commercially available ales that must be brewed inside of the walls of a monastery run by Trappist monks to receive the designation. This kind of beer represents a bridge to the monastic traditions of medieval Europe and their contributions to the art and science of brewing. Here are some of the sources I relied on for this lecture. I look forward to your comments and questions.